This is The Issue, and I am the Ghetto Man. Today's issue, drones and drone owners' rights, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and whether or not it's even constitutional. Now, everyone within the drone community is aware of the FAA's proposed draconian rules for drone owners. Okay, what are the drone owners going to do if these rules are adopted and actually implemented? Well, before we can answer that question, I have a few questions that I would like to answer first. One, where does the FAA get the legal authority to exist in the first place? Two, where does the FAA get its jurisdiction to impose any of its arbitrary rules on a U.S. citizen? And three, is the FAA constitutional? Okay, what is the Federal Aviation Administration? The FAA claims to be a governmental body of the United States of America. It also claims to have the power to regulate all aspects of civil aviation within the United States. Their alleged powers include the construction, operation of airports, air traffic management, the certification of personnel and aircraft, and the protection of U.S. assets during the launch or re-entry of a commercial spacecraft. Okay, how did the FAA get its power? Does it come from the U.S. Constitution? Well, according to the FAA, its power was delegated to it by the authority of the International Civil Aviation Organization. Well, what is the International Civil Aviation Organization? The International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO, is a specialized agency of the United Nations, not the United States. It is located in Quartier International of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Okay, what does the ICAO do? The ICAO changes the principles and techniques of international air navigation and fosters the planning and development of international air transport to ensure safe and orderly growth. The ICAO Council adopts standards and recommended practices concerning air navigation, its infrastructure, flight inspection, prevention of unlawful interference, a facilitation of border crossing procedures for international civil aviation. Within the ICAO is a technical body called the Air Navigation Commission, ANC. The commission is composed of 19 commissioners nominated by the ICAO's contracting states, those countries that sign on to the agreement, and appointed by the ICAO Council. Now, the commissioners serve as independent experts who, although nominated by their states, do not serve as state or political representatives, so they say. It's important to note that the commissioners are not elected by we the people, nor do they serve or represent us pursuant to our nation's constitutional mandates. Instead, they serve a foreign jurisdiction that is not subject to our Constitution, the United Nations. All international standards and recommended practices are developed under the direction of the ANC through the formal process of the ICAO panels. Once approved by these unelected people that serve on these panels, the Commission's standards are then sent to the Council, the political body of the ICAO, for consultation and coordination with the member states before final adoption. The ICAO is distinct from other international air transport organizations, particularly because it alone is vested with international authority among the signatory states, which include the United States, which is done pursuant to the Treaty Clause of the United States Constitution, which is Article 6, which reads as follows: This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made pursuant thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything to the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Now, other organizations include the International Air Transport Association, a trade association representing the airlines, the Civil Air Navigation Service Organization, an organization of air navigation service providers, and Airports Council International, a trade association of airport authorities. The ICAO defines the protocols for air accident investigation that are followed by the transport safety authorities in countries signatory to the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation. That's a mouthful. Well, what is the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation? It came from a United Nations convention called the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation, also known as the Chicago Convention. This established the International Civil Aviation Organization, and as I stated earlier, the ICAO is a specialized agency of the UN, not the United States, charged with coordinating international air travel. It's important to remember. The convention establishes rules of airspace, aircraft registration, safety, security, and details the rights of the signatories, those assigned for the agreement, in relation to air travel. The convention also contains provisions pertaining to taxation. Taxation, by the way, that runs afoul to the United States citizens' right to no taxation without representation. The document was signed by 52 signatory states on December 7, 1944 in Chicago. It received the requisite 26 ratification on March 5, 1947 and went into effect on April 4, 1947, the same date that the ICAO came into being. In October of the same year, the ICAO became a specialized agency of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. The convention has since been revised 8 times. So as you can see, the FAA gets all of its pretended authority, and I call it pretended authority because it comes from the United Nations, pursuant to the treaty clause found in Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Okay, can a treaty made pursuant to Article 6 nullify the protections contained in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights? Well, the answer to that question is no, and here's why. The UN treaty does not supersede the United States Constitution. No citizen is bound to any treaty that denies the protections guaranteed to them by the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution of the United States does not grant Congress any authority to place its lawmaking powers in the hands of any other branch of government, nor does it permit Congress to delegate that power to a governing body that has been created pursuant to the Treaty Clause of Article 6 of the United States Constitution. Now, it's well-settled law, as well as the opinion of the United States Supreme Court, that treaties cannot supersede the U.S. Constitution or the Bill of Rights. Now I'm going to quote directly from a court case. This is the United States Supreme Court. I'll give you the cite as soon as I finish. Quote, "There is nothing in this language which intimates that treaties and laws enacted pursuant to them do not have to comply with the provisions of the Constitution, nor is there anything in the debates which accompanied the drafting and ratification of the Constitution which even suggests such a result. It would be manifestly contrary to the objections of those who created the Constitution, as well as those who are responsible for the Bill of Rights, let alone alien to our entire constitutional history and tradition, to construe Article 6 as permitting the United States to exercise power under an international agreement, like the United Nations Charter, without observing constitutional prohibitions. In effect, such construction would permit amendment of the document in a manner not sanctioned by Article 5. The prohibitions of the Constitution were designed to apply to all branches of the national government, and they cannot be nullified by the executive or by the executive and the Senate combined. It comes from a case called Reed versus Colvert, 354 U.S. 1. The FAA clearly violates the entire Bill of Rights in that it violates a U.S. citizen's rights from freedom of speech to due process of law. None dare oppose the FAA in fear that it may be targeted by it with its pretended legislation. Now, believe it or not, this is one of the reasons that the American Revolution was fought and is clearly stated in the Declaration of Independence. Now, they're saying, when they say he, they're referring to the King of England, but I'm going to sit here and refer to the bureaucracy, the FAA. He has erected a multitude of new offices and set hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out our substance, unquote. Quote, he has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, in this case the United Nations, and unacknowledged by our laws, given his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. And this comes from the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. FAA rules are pretended legislation. The FAA does not represent we the people. It represents the United Nations. No one within the FAA is elected by we the people. If asked, most people have no idea who even runs it. The FAA acts independent of the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Privacy laws, the presumption of innocence, due process of law, the proof of criminal behavior, the right to be charged with a crime, unlawful search and seizure, the right to a trial by jury, the right to counsel for your defense, the right to confront your accusers, the right to examine and cross-examine witnesses against you, the right to present evidence on your behalf, the right to life, liberty, and property, all guaranteed and protected by the Bill of Rights, is thrown out the window ex parte by the FAA. The FAA is clearly in violation of the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, in that the U.S. Constitution does not delegate any authority for its creation at all. In fact, the FAA mirrors the mandates of the sixth plank of the Communist Manifesto instead. Now let's read the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which reads as follows. Quote, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Okay, that's easy to understand. The 10th Amendment prohibits the federal government from any powers not specifically delegated to it by the U.S. Constitution. Please show me where, in the U.S. Constitution, there has been a constitutional amendment establishing the authorization and the creation of the FAA. You see, if the Constitution doesn't authorize the establishment of the FAA, there can be no FAA, period. An argument. There's no argument beyond that. Now let's look at the sixth plank of the Communist Manifesto, which reads as follows. The centralization of the means of communication and transportation in the hands of the state. The second part of the sixth plank calls for the centralization of the means of transportation. Have you ever heard of the Department of Transportation? You know, the DOT? Well, the FAA is part of the DOT. Every road, highway, railroad, or airway in this country is regulated and controlled by the government. Every truck, bus, car, airplane, and bicycle moving across this nation is subject to complete government regulation and control, just like the sixth plank of the Communist Manifesto calls for. You see, when traveling in America, make sure that your traveling papers are in order. You know, your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. Oh, yeah. And make sure that your drone flying papers are in order too, comrade. But what if your drone papers are not in order? Watch out. Exorbitant fines and possible jail times may be in your future. Why? Because you dare to fly a drone without your flying papers being in order. Since when does the sixth plank of the Communist Manifesto trump the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution? It doesn't, folks. It's time to wake up and smell the communism. Are we the people? Are we bound to obey an unconstitutional law? If the government passes a law that's unconstitutional, or creates an agency like the FAA that's unconstitutional? Are we bound by that law? Well, let's take a look at what the United States Supreme Court has to say on this subject. Quote, "No one is bound to obey an unconstitutional law. All laws which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void," unquote. Comes from a case called Marbury versus Madison, 5 U.S. 137. Here's another quote. I'm not going to quote, there's many more than I'm quoting here, but I'm going to quote a few just so you can get the idea. Quote, "When rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation that would abrogate them." Miranda versus Arizona, 384 U.S. 436. Here's one more. Quote, "An unconstitutional act is not law, confers no rights, it imposes no duties, affords no protection, it creates no office. In its legal contemplation, it is inoperative as though it had never been passed." Norton versus Shelby County, 118 U.S. 425. In a nutshell, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, is an unconstitutional governmental body that unlawfully exercises pretended powers, not authorized by the U.S. Constitution. It regulates all aspects of civil aviation in the United States, as well as its surrounding international waters, without any constitutional authority to do so whatsoever. The FAA, as it pertains to a United States citizen, me, violates the entire Bill of Rights in that it denies due process of law to a private citizen who owns and flies a drone. As I said, the FAA gets its authority from the United Nations, not the U.S. Constitution. The UN has no jurisdiction over anything, especially the United States. The FAA has no jurisdiction over any private citizen in the United States. If you choose to obey the FAA, you do so voluntarily. As for me, I will not acquiesce to the FAA's pretended jurisdiction. I have no intention of obeying any of the unconstitutional United Nations FAA drone rules. I am a free man. I live in a free country. I will fly my drone anywhere I choose. As long as I'm not violating anyone else's life, liberty, or property, I will fly when I want to and where I want to. And I will not get a license. And a license license actually the definition means to do that which is otherwise illegal. And it's not illegal for me to fly my property in my skies. I will take pictures of anything that is in the public view with that drone. I will do whatever I wish with those pictures. Those pictures are my property. I own them. I can keep them if I want to. I can share them if I want to. I can give them away if I want to. And I can sell them if I want to. And I can sell them without fear of an arbitrary fine imposed on me by an unconstitutional bureaucracy. When you look at this, where's the crime here? Where's the corpus delicti? Where's the violation of somebody's life, liberty, or property? Whose life was taken? whose liberty was impaired, whose property is damaged or stolen, and where is the due process of law? You see, I will privately work weddings, parties, or any other venue that is willing to pay me for my services, and I will do so free of any governmental interference whatsoever, especially an unconstitutional communist bureaucracy established not by the U.S. Constitution, but a jurisdiction that is foreign to our Constitution, the United Nations. It's a foreign jurisdiction. It has no power over me. Unfortunately, and this is the truth, you all know it as soon as you hear it. Unfortunately, most Americans haven't got the knowledge or the sand to stand up to an unconstitutional, unelected, corrupt communist bureaucracy like the FAA. That's why they're on a power grab. They count on your ignorance. They count on you to kiss their boots. As the court said in a Supreme Court case called Laird versus Tanum, 408 U.S. 1, quote, "Those who already walk submissively will say there is no cause for alarm." Remember, failing to exercise a constitutionally protected right presumes that the right has been waived. There you have it. There's the law. What you do with it is your choice. As for me, I refuse to live in the land of the free, home of the communist slave. I'm flying free, baby. A quick side note here. I know some of you are thinking, well, what about corporations like Amazon and other companies using drones for their businesses? Well, corporations are another story. And all I'm going to do is just lay down a little foundation for this. We'll discuss this later. You have to remember, when we're dealing with corporations, that corporations are creatures of the state. The state creates them. And unlike a free U.S. citizen, corporations can be regulated. And they can be regulated to the point that they're regulated out of existence if need be. Now, I'm going to quote from the United States Supreme Court again, so you can understand when we're dealing with Amazon and Google and any of these other companies that want to go ahead and use drone deliveries sometime in the future, these people, this is what we're dealing with. These are the people who can be regulated, not you and me. Now listen to the words of the court here. It's very important. Quote, "The corporation is a creature of the state. It is presumed to be incorporated for the benefit of the public. It receives certain special privileges and franchises and holds them subject to the laws of the state and the limitation of its charter. Its powers are limited by law. It can make no contract not authorized by its charter. Its rights to act as a corporation are only preserved to it so long as it obeys the laws of its creation. There is a reserve right in the legislature to investigate its contracts and find out whether it has exceeded its powers. It would be a strange anomaly to hold that a state, having chartered a corporation to make use of certain franchises, could not, in the exercise of its sovereignty, the creator, inquire how these franchises had been employed." That comes from a case called Hale versus Hinkle, 201 U.S. 4. Congress already has the power to control and regulate corporations and can adopt any rules necessary to do so. On the other hand, Congress does not have the authority to control U.S. citizens as they do corporations. Any issue in controversy dealing with a drone owner, a private citizen, must be settled pursuant to the Bill of Rights. I am the Ghetto Man. Thank you for watching. If you're politically correct, then you're legally wrong. And if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem. Please subscribe to my BitChute channel and please share.